The Freedom from Religion Foundation, right from the get-go, the name of their organization doesn't even match the wording in the Constitution. The name of their organization in itself is a banner flat out telling you we are liberals taking liberties to twist the Constitution to suit our worldview, because that is what liberals do. I'll remind you, it is the right to free religious exercise, not freedom from religion. Because when you try to change it to freedom from religion, what people like Laurie Gaylor takes that to mean is they have the right to take religion away from others. And that's exactly what they want to do. That's what the liberal interpretation of the Constitution does.
I think what's happening. Propaganda.
Liberals are always the ones saying, if you don't like it, you don't have to watch it, you don't have to listen to it, you don't have to read it, and if you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor. In other words, it's all goat squeeze. But why is this woman tripping over Bibles in hotels? She says that we Christians would be so offended if hotels were to put a book like The God Delusion in a hotel that was funded by the government. Man, where's she been? Students are being programmed in our government-run schools that God is a delusion at the taxpayers' expense all the time. But I guess she wants to know why it's okay, that it's the Bible that's put in hotels and not other books. Because the majority of the country is Christian, that's why. You Democrats claim to be Democrats because you swear by the majority rule, right? Well, the majority of the country consider themselves Christian and does feel that the Word of God is a good thing to have access to. Since a hotel is a hospitality industry, it's a nice thing to be able to go into a hotel room and find little amenities like reading material, and reading material that most Americans generally agree on that would appeal to most people would be the Bible. Most grown folks who aren't even Christian don't have a hissy fit about a Bible being in the drawer. But Gaylor is acting like a 6-year-old kid, acting like the Bible in the drawer is like a monster under the bed. But in liberal atheist fashion, this woman is so selfish that she does not care that the majority of the country is Christian. She wants us all to see it her way. Laurie Gaylor is hypocrisy in Day's face, as she is pro-abortion while accusing the Bible of cheapening life. If one of God's commandments is to not murder, then I would not call that cheapening life. And all the commandments are set in place to keep man from cheapening life, because a violation of any of the commandments leads to murder. A violation that Laurie Gaylor has no problem with other people violating, being that she's pro-abortion. She is pro-cheapening of life, not God. In fact, I think it's the Bible that says, for God so loved the world that he gave his only son. That doesn't sound like cheapening life. What that sounds like is life to God is worth more than any of us could ever see ourselves paying. But these atheist liberals don't see it that way. They would rather see it as our so-called God murdered his son. This is how this works. You so-called pacifist liberals always like to point your finger at the conservative hawks and armchair warriors who wouldn't send their children to be sacrificed in war. Now, if that's the case, then you should have no problem with God, because God did what you demand of conservative so-called warmongering politicians. God did send his son to war. And just as the soldier would sacrifice himself by throwing himself on a grenade for his country and to make sure his compatriots could have a chance to make it home, Jesus basically threw himself over a grenade for his people so that we could all have a chance to make it home. What other God of any other doctrine has that distinction? And Gaylor, the pro-abortion advocate, says the Bible cheapens life? And I'll remind you, Jesus didn't step into war as an enlisted infantryman. Jesus stepped into war as the king. And normally it's the head of state that signs the draft. But with Jesus, the King of Kings himself was drafted, sent into war by his father on a rescue mission. And Gaylor, the pro-abortion advocate, says the Bible cheapens life? So for any of you who curse the powers that be because they don't know what it's like to have to be sent to die for their country, You can't say that about Jesus. Jesus, the King of Kings, above any of our elected powers, didn't burn his draft card. He wasn't no draft dodger. Jesus didn't try to play the conscientious objector. Jesus stepped into the theater and was tortured and killed because you mean that much to him. And to those who would say, well, no big deal, Jesus was killed for our salvation, bang, it's over, we're saved, Jesus doesn't allow us that cop-out. Who among us resisted all sin even to qualify to be where Jesus was? None. And then who would endure the torture that he did? None would, especially if you could get out of it. The second that whip touched Jesus' back, Jesus could have stood up, walked out of those chains like they were wet paper, erased the stripe on his back, and say, screw this, you people suck. Dad, you can send them all to hell, I don't care. But Jesus didn't do that, now did he? He stuck it out. He was a prisoner of war, yet he could have stepped out of his confines at any time. But instead, he took every lick, and he didn't curse them before it was finished. In fact, he asked for forgiveness for the ones who did him dirty. So Gaylor, you're not cheap to God. He's cheap to you. So when you try to compare having Dawkins' book in a hotel room to having the Bible, I have to ask, what did Dawkins do that Jesus didn't do to earn his place tucked quietly in a drawer at a hotel room? I'm Alfonso Rachel with Zonation, and I'll remind Gaylor that if the atheists believe in nothing pertaining to religion and nothing is forced to be in that drawer, then wouldn't that be atheists imposing their beliefs onto us? Yes, it would. The balance of that is, if you want to read it, it's there. If you don't believe in it and you don't want to read it, you don't have to. That is the balance of freedom. This is what liberals are too selfish to understand. We're already satisfying the secularists by paying for secular textbooks that are required reading in schools. A Bible sitting in a hotel room, even if paid for by taxes, isn't required reading. Screw this, you people suck.